Welcome to Surround Presents, the show where we explore everything the Surround Network has to offer. On this episode, we're showcasing Turf's Sense of Space podcast, which explores how buildings and spaces shape who we are. Hosts Faraz Shaw and Ella Hazard engage in a captivating discussion on whether buildings can possess a soul, examining their impact in communities and cultural memory. Don't miss this enriching exploration of our architectural landscapes and their human connections. If you like this episode, check out all of Sense of Space at surroundpodcasts.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to Sense of Space, a podcast about the built environment and all the stuff we interact with. I'm Ella Hazard.
And I'm Faraz Shaw.
Hey, Faraz Shaw. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I am good. I am T-minus a few days to like a big sabbatical and kind of in my comfy clothes and gearing up. How are you doing? What's going on in your world?
You know, I was up late the other night going down another YouTube rabbit hole.
Don't tell me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I that predictable? Yes.
I mean,
I am.
All right. But no, that is predictable, but what you look up is definitely not. So tell us.
This is an interesting one. So
Okay.
I stumbled across this classical musician. This young lady was doing like these like reaction videos, right? So they watch or they're listening to or watching a music video for the first time. So typically a genre other than classical music, as if they've been isolated their entire life.
Uh-huh.
But it was kind of interesting, right? You see these people have, I don't know, sometimes kind of emotional reactions. And the one that kind of started off the rabbit hole was actually the MTV Unplugged from the 90s of Nirvana, where they were doing that folk cover of the, like, I think the Leadbellies had done it originally, but like, Where Did You Sleep Last Night?
Ooh.
The person had heard that and like reacted very intensely to like the ending of it, like where he kind of goes into like this little more raw kind of moment. And it just got me thinking about like other music moments like that, or other moments where like these strong emotional reactions. So the next one that was kind of interesting was like I was listening to one of my favorites from, I think it was back in high school, but it was the Yeah Yeah Yeahs Maps. I don't know if you've ever seen the music video for this.
I'm like a hardcore anti-music video person. We'll have it. That's a whole other Oprah, but yeah.
Okay, so I love this song, right?
Okay.
And it was one of those things where I didn't actually see the music video until much later in life when it was out on YouTube. But there's a moment in there where the singer is actually like, you know, she's starting to cry. And the story is that it's actually, those were real tears, not like prompted or provoked because the person that she was dating at the time was another musician. And he was late to come on set because she was about to leave on tour and was worried that they weren't going to see each other before.
Aww.
And all this stuff just got me thinking about it and like thinking about like what we do as our career. And I was reflecting on, you know, the neocon experiences that we've had where like you pour in a lot of time and energy and emotion into your work and it can feel very intense in the moment. And
Yeah.
I was curious, like, if there are things like that from your program or like your architecture background where you've had to like pour in that level of intensity that, you know, when it's over or at certain moments you're like, holy shit, like it's a, you know, outpouring of emotion and feeling.
I don't know if it's about architecture. I think it's just about like the intensity of like myself as a human. Like I am not a half-assed kind of person. Like I am all in and like super intense, whole ass or no ass kind of person. No matter what I'm
That
doing.
needs to be another one of our t-shirts. and
T-shirts,
posters.
whole ass or no ass.
Or no ass.
Which is like annoying. I have like no chill. I think
Yeah.
most people that know me would actually say that. Like I'm not a very cool person to be around because I'm such an intense.
You're not cool.
Like, yeah, no, I'm not cool at all. I'm like very nerdy and very intense, or like kind of 3 martini Ella and doesn't give a shit. No ass, right? Showing my whole ass. but I think what you're suggesting, I love that kind of reaction. But what it was making me think of actually is like, have you ever been into like a space or had an experience musically or otherwise that it has like given you like that intense of a reaction one way or another? Like, can you recall something?
Yeah, actually, it was in LA. When I was living there, we went with a family to go to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And there was an exhibit at the time, this kind of life work of this artist. And she was kind of a multimedia artist. So there were a lot of drawings and sketches and photography. And then I think towards the later part of her career, she was doing more with like video. And so they basically created a box, like a black box that you went into within the larger gallery space. It was just enough room for a chair.
Yeah.
An old television. And it was playing a video on loop. And then there was a small like side table with a box of tissues on there. Like that should have been a warning ahead of time. But all it did was it was a repeat of the Rodney King like
oh shit,
like arrest and kind of beating, and it had an overlay of the president at the time speech. That's all it was. And it was just really deep, and like the contrast of what was being said with what was being shown was so distinct and jarring.
Wow.
I remember being in that moment. I was like, well, fuck. Like,
that just gave me goosebumps, even just your description of that. Yeah. Like the dissonance between those two. Yeah.
And the tissues were necessary. I mean, like I remember like sitting in that moment and just crying. I mean, it wasn't like, ugly cry or anything like that, but it was still,
there is no other kind of cry. Let's be honest.
Right. Right. But that was I think a designed experience that was, very much meant to like push you and to like give you a gut punch in the feels, and it worked. 100% worked.
Wow. Have you ever watched any of the on the completely opposite note, the funniest of like YouTube music video things where they like remove all of the sound and they just put in like the sound effects? Like those are great.
And we will make sure to put that YouTube link in the show notes.
We'll put them all in there. Note. Choose your own adventure. I don't know.
Well, okay. So the reason all of that stuff stood out to me was, I don't think it's specific to music, right? I think that was the vehicle for it, but I do think that there's a lot in art and music and design and just culture in general where people really care a lot about what they do and they put everything in it. And I think that's true for the built environment, which to me seems like a very logical segue into the topic of today, which is, do buildings have souls?
Ooh, I love this. This is one of my favorites.
My hypothesis is, I think so. But it's interesting to me because I think that intention, it's shown, it's like it carries through in so many different ways of a building. Yeah. Right? Not just in the end result of the thing, but like what happens inside that building or what happens inside that space. But I think that's something that it feels very real.
Oh, I totally agree. This topic is probably one of my favorites because there's so many different places we can kind of go with it. But I was kind of thinking back to one of the episodes we talked about with like vibe, like what are the elements of that? And like one of the sort of bits of conversation was like, do you as like a designer or architect like orchestrate and plan out what everything that is that's going to like happen, like what things will be, or is our job more to be like kind of like a prompt generator and set up spaces that can kind of evolve over time?
Right, you're creating a canvas for life to happen and culture to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Or like you start, but then the people who occupy it and then will continue to sort of inhabit these spaces, like are in some ways they carry that on and they will make it what it will be. So I think it's like a collaborative effort of like designers. Like we get to start things, but we're not actually really much in control of like the actual life of a building, and I think that's actually quite beautiful.
Totally. I think actually that I was doing some of our homework and I was reading some of the items that I think our associate producers Moti and Patricia had put up on in our little space, but we were talking a lot about the kind of historical preservation and some significance of a few buildings, and Wax Trax Records here in Chicago, the Warehouse here in Chicago, and then also CBGB in New York. And that was the one that I thought was super interesting, where maybe the buildings, right, weren't designed to be record stores or music venues at their onset. However, because life happens, culture happens, and, you know, CBGB in particular was this amazing music venue, and became really iconic, not just in New York, but throughout the entire world. You know, people who are touring internationally, like, they would have their American shows at CBGB.
Right.
But they kind of created a purpose and an anchor moment in their community.
Mm-hmm.
And then, right, like, whether it's because of like rent increases for CBGB's case or other circumstances, you know, they're no longer able to inhabit those spaces and it has to move on, right? So somebody else takes ownership of it. And it was really interesting that the next tenant, I think, was like a fashion designer, and they had, I think, took certain care. I don't want to overspeak, but they had taken certain care to preserve some elements like the toilet and some stickers, and they found some like playbills for shows that were there. They put those up throughout the space. So their intent was to try and, you know, hopefully for the right reasons, but their intent was to kind of preserve some elements of what came before. I'm curious, like, what you think about that. Like, what is there a responsibility? Is there some hopefulness that happens, or is it just kind of, hey, my space, fair game?
I don't know. I think I have like a foot in both camps. I'm not sure that everything deserves to be saved, but I do view that, like, when preservation, when done well, can be like a celebration of something. But I don't also agree that we, like, should necessarily preserve things and keep them pristine. It's like, keep the pieces that are interesting, but feel free with sort of the rest of the space. Like things evolve, right? And I feel like sometimes we get a little precious about the past, and I think that there's a way to, and there's no parameter for this, but like tastefully celebrate something and at the same time allow a space to be what it needs to be. And like, what I find really interesting is when, like, buildings or designers or cities find a way to do a mix of both, where you get, like, you know, like even in like Rome, right? Like ancient cities where you just kind of build on top. And so, like, if you go farther and farther down, like, you find remnants of what was like, I don't know that we always have to destroy what was in order to have what will be.
Yes.
But I also think that there are some people that could, like, actually help us think about that a bit better. And we had a conversation with one.
Yeah. Well, you know, just real quick too, I want to touch on, like, what your point is. Like, there are things that you discover in that space, right? So by the time this podcast is out, we will hopefully be in it. But we've been redoing an office space at the Merchandise Mart, which is an old building.
Yeah, beautiful building.
I have no idea how many tenants have been in the space that we're in now.
Yep.
But you could tell when we were doing some of the demo, it was Technion's old showroom. And I'm pretty sure they had been there after several other tenants. And you start to peel back these layers of history, like the columns, as an example. You would peel back the outer layer, and then you would discover some really hideous, like, brick veneer wallpaper.
The lick and stick brick.
Yeah, exactly. And
amazing.
Like, but why? And why this color? Or the fact that actually, and I'm sure they had reasons, probably weren't good, but they had reasons to cover the light well in that space. So they'd actually drywalled all of that in, which was natural light. Like, why would you hide that? But, you know, these were some interesting kind of things that we discovered, and we took care to reveal the brick that was there, and, like, there were just these interesting things that we had to balance in the design process with our partners. Of, like, okay, how much of this are we preserving? How much of this are we going to cover? Even in the ceiling. There was concrete that had used steel forms to shape it, And in some parts of the mart, they took those out, as you're supposed to do.
Mhm.
On our floor, they did not.
Oh,
They just left them in.
the steel.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's real stuck on this one. Just leave it. Like,
Yeah, but like the whole floor. So it was like, okay, well, how do you
annoying.
use that as an element of the design or not?
it's funny.
But yeah, it was interesting. Sorry.
So
Anyway,
do you feel like that space has a soul?
I don't know. I think that it will have a soul soon,
Okay.
because I do think that, this is kind of what we were talking about a little earlier. Like, I was reflecting on some of the showrooms that we did at the mart, temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely feel like there was a lot of like culture that happens in that space. And,
Yeah.
even if it is for like these temporary moments, it is kind of like a venue
Mm-hmm.
where people are there interacting and there's a lot of excitement. And like, I think that gives it the soul. Like, all of that culture is what gives it the significance. And I guess I'm looking forward to imbuing the space with soul. But right now, I think it's still under construction. We're still building the
Construction
soul.
site.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that maybe that's like you kind of hit on the point, is that like when done well and tastefully and you preserve the things, like I'm looking off at like a brick wall right now of this building that used to be a furniture factory, but it's now artist residences. It's like the thing that allows me to appreciate what was, or to like look at that and kind of wonder, or I'm like looking at one of the wood beams in here that's like covered in like staples. I was like, what the hell was stapled? Like literally covered in like, what? Like, it makes me wonder, like, what happened in here before? What are the things that have occurred? But I think like when done well, you can kind of put some things on display that remind you that this isn't the first time this space has been something. But I can only do that when that's in kind of juxtaposition to something that allows me to sit comfortably and observe that, right? Or to participate or activate a space in a certain way.
Like that CBGB, right?
Yeah.
It was all the stickers that were in the bathroom.
Totally.
I think I was reading an article, they had actually left the toilet, which I don't know, that was the right
Wise.
thing to preserve.
They're like choices.
On the other hand, right, you go over to the merchandise mart and the the third floor showrooms.
Yeah.
They still have, there were a couple that kept it, the large steel sliding doors, where they would load and unload off of the trains when it was originally having trains running into it.
That's crazy.
Right. And so, I mean, there's some interesting elements of doing that at varying levels.
Yeah.
I don't think they kept any toilets from the OG days, but
I like, this may be an unpopular thing to say, but I worked on the renovation of Dodger Stadium as like a mercenary project architect, like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. And one of the most controversial moves that like we got the most shit for was we did the concourses, like all of the concessions, all of that.
Yeah.
Bathrooms had trough toilets in the men's room. So like, when I went there to go like do the measurements and all of that, like, so we took them out because like,
thank God,
it smelled horrible, I won't lie. But that was like one of the most controversial things. Like, we got so much flack. They were like, you took out. I was like, how is this not better? But like, guys apparently really enjoyed that. I don't. Bizarre, right? Ugh.
So we had this conversation with Patrick Grossi from Preservation Chicago. I wonder if he would have been for or against taking away the trough urinals at Dodger Stadium.
Yeah, I don't know. We worked with a local like a historic preservation architect named Brenda Levin, who worked with like John Lautner and did a lot of like the mid-century stuff. So
yeah,
she I believe, I hope she's not upset with me saying this, was supportive of us removing the troughs.
Okay, good.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know what he would say. But your segue attempt was far better than mine. So yeah,
we'll follow up with him later and ask.
Yeah, we'll.
Are you pro or against trough?
Pro or con?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a great conversation that we had with him earlier today. I feel like he's, as we were talking about, like the kind of preservation folks that actually do celebrate and kind of can navigate the lack of absolutism in terms of like progress, but also preservation. My takeaway from him was that he had a really good sense about what to keep and why.
Yeah, and it was nuanced, right? Like
yes.
to your point, right? It was not absolutist.
Yes, not at all. And I also kind of wonder if it helps. So his background, he mentioned that he wasn't an architect, but he came at it from more like a political and historical understanding, which I thought was really
in urban history.
Urban history. I didn't unpack what that exactly was, but sounds like a really
have to do some Googling.
There'll be links, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was cool. And I think that the fact that he didn't come from an architecture background, I think is actually helpful there.
Yeah.
What was your sense of him? Yeah.
Yeah, I was really impressed with the conversation. I think, to your point, right, there's a lot of nuance to it. And like there is, I think, a perception that he was talking a lot about that preservation movements in general are seen as maybe adversarial, or we want to save everything just because it's old. But he was really helping to shed light on this, and it's actually a lot more that goes into it.
Yeah.
That I think at least in the United States, the federal level has very strict criteria of what you can be eligible for and what needs to be protected. And then I think certain municipalities have other groups that maybe have different levels of protection or intent behind it.
Yeah.
But all of these things only happen once your building becomes at least 50 years old, which is super interesting.
Yeah.
I know we were joking before the show, like that's, I guess, when your building goes through puberty or it's eligible for retirement. I don't know.
Wait, does it mean that we don't have souls yet because we're not 50?
Yeah, I guess so.
Just kidding.
Sorry. A few more years. But I thought that was really interesting that it's actually, there's a lot of thought and care that goes into understanding the context of those buildings, because it's not just age. Mm-hmm. It could be architectural significance. It could be cultural significance. It could be an individual that inhabited that space or had done something in that space that made it stand out as a thing that needs to be protected and preserved.
Yep.
He had one phrase that I really liked that was cultural continuity.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was a thing that they're trying to preserve.
Yep. I like that.
I love that.
Yeah. Yep. Or it could even just be like a really good example of a specific kind of architecture that's like very much of its time.
Yeah.
And I think that like the conversation that we had around sort of the geography and like when something was built or when a city was built and sort of how that influenced the approach towards those things.
Yeah.
Was kind of interesting. Like coming from, like he said, I think he was from Philly.
Yep.
And you guys are in Chicago and I'm here in LA, like all cities that were built at really different times, with really different sort of histories and approaches. Like coming from the East Coast, I always felt like everything in like New York was so done. And like if I was going to practice architecture there, all I was going to be doing was like interiors. And that's part of why I ended up out in LA, was that I was like, oh, there's so much more opportunity out here to like do like a whole building and to like learn the whole thing. And I don't know if that's true. That could just be the story I was telling myself at the time.
Also warmer weather.
Well, that too. And you could get licensed faster out here because you could take your tests at the same time that you were like finishing your hours. For what we called IDP back then. I don't think it's called something different now. But anyway, that's a whole other Oprah. But he also brought up like sort of like the case for sustainability and or like affordability. Like there was a lot of sort of social layers to his commentary. And we were talking about like embodied carbon in existing buildings versus like you have all that material already there. Like why would we waste that as a sort of like a new face maybe for
those are, I think, really relevant points to this, maybe a broader point that he was making, that usually the fuss isn't made until something is about to be destroyed.
Right.
And then he clarified that, where it was actually more about a moment of growth, or where growth is happening is where you end up having things that that are under threat, right? So this idea that he was talking about, well, okay, if you're preserving, a home or a commercial building or another space, that's probably a good sign that the city is healthy, that there's things happening, and that the view on preservation is actually different now than what it was at the beginning of kind of preserving these early examples of American history, versus now it's almost like you're talking about, right? Like it's kind of activism in a way, right?
Yeah.
Like you're preserving the environment, you are providing more affordable solutions rather than trying to demolish something which is really wasteful and then build something new, which is also to a degree kind of wasteful.
Yep. No, but he brought up a term that I'd never heard before, which was NOAA, an acronym called Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing.
Yes.
Basically, like,
love that.
Kind of like what you're saying. It's like older building stock that's like maybe not like not going to rent as like luxury, but it's like it's there and it's still functional. It's like mechanically and structurally sound, and like it's housing people. Like that's actually a good thing, and that with very little effort or investment, you could bring that. You could leave it as is, or like improve it in place, and that it's actually doing a good job at what it's doing already. I hadn't ever thought about that.
Yeah, well, that's what I think about that in terms of like second lives and third lives of spaces.
Yeah,
I guess oftentimes we're seeing that where, like, we were talking a little bit about for Chicago, we've got the Fulton Market area, which used to be the meatpacking district, and is now home to a lot of our friends and friends of friends in the manufacturing and the commercial interiors. You've got furniture dealerships, you have high-end restaurants and hospitality that are popping up in those spaces, that some are better than others, but some are preserving those spaces and leveraging what was there, the adaptive reuse, and then others are just like completely like nuke and pave, and we'll put a huge skyrise there or a larger building, and it's just you end up with a lot of different approaches to the same space.
Yep. I think that's interesting. I also like that you just brought up the term adaptive reuse, because he was very, I think, pro adaptive reuse, and that it was like save the things that are worth saving about a building, but like the whole point is that if it's going to live on and like stay relevant, it needs to adapt to different uses and be used as like for the needs of that particular area at that time.
The adaptability is big.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, what I was gonna I put this in our little workspace, but I have the actual book here. This is like one that I actually love, and I thought this is what he was going to reference.
Yeah.
But this is a book called How Buildings Learn by Stuart Brand. And if you don't know who Stuart Brand is, he wrote the book I think he's the most famous for is called The Whole Earth Catalog, or The Last Whole Earth Catalog.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the 70s. He's like, which was like this like amalgamation of like tools and things that you needed to survive in this sort of like off-grid, like happy hippie commune life. But this book about how buildings learn was actually introduced to me by a colleague from the days in Armstrong named Bill France. And he and I like used this as a pretty interesting tool to think about what buildings of the future might be like, and how do we design for more adaptability? How do we plan buildings now that will actually actively sort of adapt in and of themselves? And like this book talks a lot about how buildings learn, talks about how buildings can like learn from each other, and it really embraces the spirit that like once these things are in the world, like they're not ours anymore, and you can't control what's going to happen, and so you should plan for that at the beginning, which I thought was really kind of smart.
I think that's spot on. I mean, right? Isn't that the ultimate success story, right? That the building or the space exists indefinitely because it was able to accommodate change.
Yeah. Well, I think like
people
the market
changing.
Is, like where you guys are moving is kind of exactly that. It's still going strong and like a very desirable place to be,
Yeah. And it's a thing where like I think as time changes, people change, culture changes, that it gets to keep up with that is super exciting.
I agree.
And that the evolution is interesting, right? That's the soul.
Yep. That is part of the soul. It's the evolution of it, and like many iterations, many lives. The other thing that Patrick brought up that I thought was interesting, when I thought he was going to say how buildings learn, the book he referenced that we haven't looked at yet, but we'll throw it in the notes, which is Buildings Must Die. And then
Buildings Must Die. Right.
Which I am excited to check out. And then, but it also talked about how they threw a funeral for a home or a home type, a home, I guess it was.
Funeral of a home. Yeah.
Yeah. Funeral for a home. As like a celebration of like, I don't know, the contents of that, the people that had lived there, a typology maybe in and of itself. I don't know. But he's going to share a YouTube link with us, which I really want to see.
You know, he was talking about that where it was a partnership between the community centers. It was the local church and some other community members. And it was something they all did together to celebrate the history.
He said that it was like something that an activation that they actually did, and that there was a YouTube video that they produced as a result of that. So hopefully he'll share that. I hope.
Yeah.
Yep.
I kind of wish we would have done that for the Mart office, like the showroom that we had in 2022 and 2023. Like, I mean, it wasn't cheap. It was kind of scrappy in the sense that it just came to life. Yeah. In such short fashion. Yeah. Really well done, but we just kind of moved out. I really wish we would have had
done a thing.
Eulogies and thrown a funeral for it.
Because it's also like an appreciation of a particular era or like a time, right?
It absolutely.
But that lives on, and you're going to repurpose that space towards something else. We did a similar event. I used to be a part of this organization called the LA Forum for Architecture and Urban Design. Down here in near where I live in the Arts District in LA, there was there's the new 6th Street Bridge that's like this beautifully designed, amazingly photographed thing. Well, right before that whole project took place, we threw our annual fundraiser mostly legally. We had most of the permits we needed. I only got one call from the city architect saying why didn't you? And I was like, do you want to just come? We'll give you free tickets. But we threw the city of LA was throwing this big party on a Sunday on top of the bridge.
Oh my God.
We decided to throw the night before a party under the bridge downtown. And we threw a funeral kind of for the bridge.
Yeah.
And we found a Louisiana second line funeral band, and so we had this whole funeral march that we did. We had art installations and did all this kind of cool stuff under the bridge. It was the grimy self-organized protest funeral. Not protest, we were happy to see it go, but wanted to celebrate it our way. And so I do believe in because I feel like those kinds of activities do honor the soul of something or something that has existed, and at the same time celebrate and make way for what will be.
The history, right? And all the things that came before and paved the way, sometimes literally, for what is to come.
Yep.
And I think that there's I was taking a little bit of notes before we were talking today about thinking about the soul of a building in two different ways. So one is, the history, right? All the cultural context, the things that happened in that space. And then the other one was the souls as its purpose, the building's purpose in an area, right?
Ooh.
If you think about some buildings, right, there's definitely a community aspect, right? Think about maybe it wasn't the first use, but the second use, those music venues. You have other purposes that maybe are more utilitarian.
Yep.
But that they end up having an identity because of their purpose.
I think I know where you're going with this, and I don't know how to say this well, but it's there's certain aesthetics that are desirable and kind of no matter where you are. If you're in Shoreditch in London, or you're in Chelsea or Meatpacking District in New York, or Arts District would be the equivalent version here in Los Angeles, Full Market, that kind of this industrial vibe. What is it about that that's so attractive or screams eventually about to be gentrified, but first it's going to be occupied by its second inhabitants, which are artists and creatives, until they get kicked out. Why is that trajectory so I don't know, prescribed? Why is that so inevitable?
I don't know. There must be something magnetic about it, just culturally, that draws people in. And I think that's true though everywhere. Even in not cities, right? I spent
What's enough? Yep, keep going. Uh-huh.
well, like, I think about where I spent a lot of my time, right? I lived in Iowa for about 12 years,
Mm-hmm.
and we had these small, I mean, using the word downtown is loose at best,
Yeah. Yep.
but you'd have like the ice cream shop
Mm-hmm.
or the gas station or the like rec center that were hubs of activity and people and interactions, and
Mm-hmm.
you had whole communities develop around all of this stuff, right? So it's like, I don't know that would exist if those spaces hadn't been there, right? Or that the culture hadn't developed around it. But
I think that's fair. But did you notice that then, or do you only appreciate that now, having like moved?
Oh, you
away
notice it then.
from-
You can feel it. You can absolutely feel it when you go around. Like, so we had this really cool corner ice cream shop, and across the street, and it's just a 2-lane street. It's not like the highway, right? Across the street was a city had a park there that was all the baseball fields.
Yep.
So you'd have all the kids playing community baseball over the summer, and then practically the whole league
just goes
little
over.
little kids go over to the ice cream shop. And
incredible.
everybody's kind of riding their bike or walking, to their house or whatever. But I think that the function of those spaces that existed there really facilitated the type of community that developed. And like, to me, like, that's a soul, right?
Yep. I like that. I think
I don't think anybody designed that particular corner shop to be the community ice cream shop that everyone huddled around over the summers. Definitely not.
Well, I think it's also like in small places. I also grew up in like a no stoplight town, so I 100% get exactly what you're talking about. It's just like when there isn't choice, like when this is the only thing to do. In some ways, it also keeps it simple, right? Like you don't have to choose this one or that one. Like this is where you go because this is all there is. And there's something really beautiful and simple about that. And I wonder if we're kind of in some ways trying to recreate some of that experience or like evoke some of that nostalgia in some of these urban spaces with like the visual language, or like why we're drawn to some of these buildings, or like,
yeah. Or I mean, what should we be doing?
That's a better question.
That I don't have the answer to, but
I don't either. But like, I don't consider myself an incredibly like nostalgic person. Like I don't.
Right.
It's not that I value the future over the past. It's just like, okay, that happens. Some pieces of this are helpful. Like, let's keep them with. But if it's not helpful, like, leave it. But I am like the only place that I feel like I get that kind of like desire to like hang on to a time before is in old buildings. Strangely, it's like bizarre.
Yep.
I think it's also driven a lot of work that like we did back in the ventures days with Armstrong. Like one of the projects we were doing was about like the reuse and circularity of materials and like thinking about when buildings must die, like where do buildings go when they die? And one of the episodes, throw a shout out to Allie Ward and her podcast Ologies. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
No.
Her content is kind of all over the place. It's just like whatever she's curious about, and I love it. But she makes a word up that's an ology around each of these topics that she goes to explore. Like it could be like chickenology or but one of the ones
chickenology.
She talks about
delicious
chickens. But she did one called Domicology, which is all about like abandoned buildings and what happens to like malls and things.
Oh my God.
Die.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was curious, like you live in a land
lot of
where
them
like
get demolished.
Yeah. But like what
Or
could
some
those things be?
Well, I mean, right now in the town that I grew up in Indiana, Washington Square Mall, if anybody's listening from Evansville, that place had like a cool arcade. It had those like big top tent like things coming in the food court.
Okay.
They demolished half of it, and right now it's just completely vacant and is basically the mall walking circuit for the elderly.
Like that's the silver sneakers crowd.
Silver sneakers, that's it.
Love it.
And it's sad. I think there might be a cobbler still in there.
Oh, it's like still operational. They shut down
Yeah.
the part. They just like consolidated what was left into one
all
half.
all the stores are kind of just, gated shut, and then you can still just do the hallways. That's it.
Interesting. Like what?
I don't even know. There's actually
be?
there's a website that still has a bunch of photos of that place too. I'll have to find that.
Huh. So what do we think are the elements of like building soul? We talked about a couple of things, like old and new together, like juxtaposition.
I think so, but it's also, even for the purely new, I do think, and this I know goes back to some of the other conversations we've been having in other episodes, I think it's all about people, man.
Yeah, I think you're not wrong about that. It is about the people that inhabit it.
Yeah.
But what is it? What is it about? Is it how they're interacting with the space? Like, what is it about what they're doing there that like gives it that?
Yeah, like you're creating interaction, you're creating moments. This is back to what you were saying at the beginning of the conversation. You're developing a space as a canvas for things to happen. And I think maybe that's what the key of this is that you've kind of created a flexible space that takes into consideration what's happening now, right? Who is the tenant? And you're creating a space for them to have culture and to have moments. At the same time, you're thinking ahead of how you don't inhibit that from happening in the future.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see what you guys do in your space at the Mart, because I think you
Oh, it'll be amazing.
All of the showrooms that you've done, I know that you'll do that really well. And I know that you and your sense of design and the whole team there, I'm sure that will be really cool. And I think it will actually celebrate precisely what you just said.
And, when we have to give its funeral, hopefully not for a very long time, there will be tears.
But you should actually design the funeral for it.
I actually really love it.
Don't miss the opportunity a second time.
Yeah, we'll find all the guests to give the eulogy.
I love that.
I kind of wanted to talk, or maybe this is a moment, Patricia, you want to tell me a story about the wax tracks? Do you have any history on that from your end?
Not personally. I don't have any I mean, I love wax tracks. But I know starting a couple years ago, they started the process to get the landmark designation for where the shop was, which was at 2449 North Lincoln.
Here in Chicago.
Here in Chicago, yes. It was originally, I want to say originally in Denver, and then they moved it to Chicago. And then now it's something totally different. I don't know exactly what it is. But they won the first round, the preliminary round for the landmark designation. So I don't know the exact process of designations, how that works. But I know they got it with support. They had people in the industrial and alternative community come out to the hearing and support.
Well, maybe if nobody's familiar with what Wax Tracks is, it was a record store that became a really cool kind of community space for not necessarily mainstream music. And then they eventually became a record label. And there were a lot of great bands that I used to listen to all the time when I was younger, still do. My favorites were Underworld, Front 242, and KMFDM. But these were things that were they were really cool cultural moments that came out of that space. And
all I want to know is that must have been a hell of if there's any sort of open hearing, but a bunch of old rockers, ravers, and what have you showing up in support of a building. I think that's a really cool that. I'm interested in that.
I really wanted to go to it. I love the family, and I really wanted to go, but the hearing was 11 a.m. on a Wednesday during turf work hours.
Right, during business hours.
I
totally would have supported that field trip research.
Yeah, but I was oh, this would be a great way to see my friends.
Oh, that's so cool. So I worked hard on word of the day. This one's slightly more fact-checked and vetted than some of our previous versions, but again, not heavily. So word of the day today is, I think we're going to pronounce this palimpsest.
I'm sorry, what?
Palimpsest.
Okay.
And it's of Greek origins, and it means a manuscript or piece of writing material on which the original writing has been effaced or removed to make room for later writing based.
Oh, interesting.
But where traces of the writing remain. So back in the day when like paper was scarce, you would write something and then erase it, but you couldn't get rid of all of it. So you would go over the top of it, but you'd still see some of what was there before. And I thought that was kind of like a really good allegory for the conversation we were having today.
So much so.
Yeah. So
it is done in art.
I think it's done mostly in writing, but I don't know.
In paintings though too.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, like artists would use that for I'll just use this canvas that had this masterpiece, but we'll just paint over it.
Yeah, totally.
And buildings.
Yeah. Well, that's fair. Palimpsest. Palimpsest. But right. I also thought that might be a good segue into like, okay, so we've done this body of work. This is our last episode this season.
Yeah.
But could we, I don't know, invite our listeners or our audience to help us think about what we will write next season over top of this? And
for the record, we will not delete this season. We'll just add a new season.
That would be the ideal. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Do you have any questions or thoughts for our future us or audience?
This is an interesting point of reflection because we've talked about a lot of different topics and a lot of things. And I'm really curious to know what resonates with our listeners. Like, what of this stuff is sparking your curiosity? Are there other topics that we should have discussed or taken a deep dive into?
Or things you never want to hear from us again. Like, don't ever.
Actually, you have no authority to talk about this. Just shut up about it.
Stop. Yeah.
But I do think that I really am curious to see what resonates and to find out what people are interested in.
Agreed.
I do hope that we get some feedback, some DMs, comments, 5-star reviews, hopefully at least above 4 stars, to be able to just get some insights of where we should take this. Because this is a conversation, right? Like, I think what we set out to do at the beginning was to ask questions. We didn't always have to have answers. Most of the time we don't. But just start the conversation. And I want to have that conversation with our listeners.
I totally agree, and can't wait to do more of this. This has been like the highlight of this year, and I've really enjoyed learning all of you through this process and like getting to know myself a bit better too.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it was different coming into this than where we ended up, where I'm pleasantly delighted by just the conversation and the organic nature of learning about some of these topics, discussing it and reflecting on how we feel.
Yep.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's been a interesting process of like learning to let go and not try to control a conversation, but just kind of learn from each other and learn together. And just to be silly, I think a little bit sometimes too, and to have fun with things. Like, we can talk about serious things, but we always have fun with that. And I think that's the reason why we started this. And I hope that rings true.
Yeah. I think that this is another opportunity to just give some shout outs and thank yous to all of our team.
Yep.
Thank you for Turf for helping to make this podcast possible.
Whoop, whoop.
Thank you to our producer, Rob Schulte, and our associate producers, Patricia Gonzalez and Moti Tavasoli. Without this team, none of this would have been possible.
Very true.
And with that being said, don't forget to send Ella your feedback. I think this time you have to send it via message in a bottle. So if you're on the East Coast, this might take some time. So just plan ahead. Otherwise, you can leave a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice.
Well, I'd like to say thank you for listening to Sense of Space. To hear more podcasts like this, please visit surroundpodcasts.com. Sense of Space is a Turf podcast and is brought to you by the Surround Network by Sandow Design Group.
you.